You know what really overcooks my rigatoni? Fake Russian nuclear blackmail. I'm talking about you defilers of minimal human decency, Mr. Karaganov and Mr. Trenin, senior figures in Russia's strategic community. They are contemplating and justifying a preemptive nuclear attack against you and me. I want us to get clear about this. After the war is over and after Putin is gone, I want us to remember every word they said, because their words are little drops of poison that erode the safety of civilized life on Earth. It's not news that nuclear blackmail is now the main tool of Russia's international diplomacy. Putin threatens nuclear war left, right and center in unspecified terms, though he formally maintains he is against a preemptive nuclear strike. You know that Russian propagandists constantly threaten to drown England in a giant wave.
Мы сегодня тренировались уничтожать Соединенные Штаты Америки.
Абсолютно верно.
And they often threaten Ukraine and the Baltics with nuclear strikes. And you know Mr. Medvedev, who has chosen obsession with nuclear explosions as a mode of self-preservation. But there is something even more disgraceful going on, and that's members of Russia's strategic community thoughtfully, without clowning, writing articles about a preemptive nuclear attack.
My guest is veteran Russian foreign policy analyst and Kremlin advisor Sergey Karaganov.
Advisor to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Here is Sergey Karaganov, veteran Russian foreign policy strategist and sometime Kremlin advisor. In June 2023, he publishes an article titled "The Use of Nuclear Weapons Can Save Humanity from a Global Catastrophe." Karaganov argues that Russia needs to launch a preemptive nuclear strike on a European NATO member country, because without that, Russia's war in Ukraine can't be solved and would anyway lead to World War III. Now let's brace ourselves for a big gulp of Mr. Karaganov's gross irresponsibility. The enemy must know that we are ready to deliver a preemptive strike in retaliation for all of its current and past acts of aggression in order to prevent a slide into thermonuclear war. If we correctly build a strategy of intimidation and deterrence and even use nuclear weapons, the risk of a retaliatory nuclear or any other strike on our territory can be reduced to an absolute minimum. Only a madman who above all hates America will have the guts to strike back in defense of Europeans, thus putting his own country at risk and sacrificing conditional Boston for conditional Poznan. But what if they do not back down? What if they have lost the instinct of self-preservation completely? In this case, we will have to hit a bunch of targets in a number of countries in order to bring those who have lost their mind to reason. Morally, this is a terrible choice, as we will use God's weapon, thus dooming ourselves to grave spiritual losses. But if we do not do this, not only Russia can die, but most likely the entire human civilization will cease to exist. By breaking the West's will to continue the aggression, we will not only save ourselves and finally free the world from the 5-century-long Western yoke, but we will also save humanity. Humanity will grow a new chance for development. Absolutely disgusting. Disgusting. Karaganov's bombshell comments sparked intense debate in Russia's strategic community. Several analysts criticized him, saying no to a preemptive nuclear strike, and 3 days after Karaganov's piece was published, Putin chimed in with a no to a preemptive nuclear strike.
These measures can be used only if there's a threat towards the Russian statehood.
But one analyst expressed sympathy. That was Dmitry Trenin, a member of Russia's Foreign and Defense Policy Council and a professor at Moscow's Higher School of Economics. Trenin said nuclear deterrence has turned out to have much more limited use, so the nuclear bullet must necessarily and demonstratively be put into the revolver drum the US leadership is recklessly playing with. Fear must be brought back into politics and public consciousness. He doesn't go so far as to call for a preemptive nuclear strike, but he openly entertains it. And I want us to listen to him carefully here, because he goes on to paint a picture that perfectly matches Putin's own theory of victory over Ukraine and the West. As for possible Russian nuclear strike on NATO countries, hypothetically speaking, Washington is unlikely to respond to these strikes by attacking Russia for fear of its retaliation against the United States. The absence of such a reaction will dispel the myth built for decades around Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty and will lead to the deepest crisis in NATO, perhaps even its collapse. It cannot be ruled out that the Atlantic elites in NATO and EU countries will panic and will be swept away by national forces, which will realize that the security of their countries does not depend on a non-existent US nuclear umbrella. The Americans are unlikely to sacrifice Boston for Poznan, just as they were not going to sacrifice Chicago for Hamburg during the Cold War. What Putin and Trenin are right about is this: the more Western democracies decline, the less likely it is that NATO will hold its collective nerve in the face of future Russian aggression. So I have a message for you. To beat Putin, keep your democracies. Western democracy is indeed in decline, and we'll talk about that a lot. But Putin and Trenin's view of Western democratic recession is unempirical. It makes dogma out of democratic collapse. But our democracies are stronger than that. They don't collapse just because they experience crisis. So their view that if they nuke us we won't respond, which I won't dignify with a critique, is at least in part predicated on false assumptions. Okay, I will dignify it with a critique. It just ain't true that starting a nuclear war against NATO is a way to reduce the odds of a nuclear war against NATO. These irresponsibles are presenting a nuclear attack on Poland as the humanitarian option. But in reality, they're playing with the future of the world. And by their words alone, they could hypothetically increase the risk of nuclear escalation from 2 to 4%. So why are they doing this? What effect are they trying to achieve, and will they achieve it? The first thing Karaganov wants to do is to mirror back what he thinks is already being talked about in the Kremlin. Therefore, even though the Kremlin's formal position is a no to a preemptive nuclear strike, Karaganov writing this suggests that people in Putin's circle are talking about it. Second, Karaganov doesn't just want to mirror, he wants to lead. That's to say, he wants to increase the chunk that conversations about a preemptive nuclear strike take up in the economy of discourse in Putin's circle. So, Karaganov is trying to mirror back what they are saying and to make them say it more. Therefore, I speculate, elevating his own position and paving a few extra yards on the road to hell for, I speculate, reputational advancement. But this will have a cascade of consequences. First, remember that Mr. Karaganov and co. are in a bubble. They are engaged in a pseudo-policy debate inside a self-immolating empire armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons. And within Putin's inner circle, there is already scant resistance to apocalyptic thinking about geopolitics.
If you want me to quote Putin, he said that, well, we're not interested in a world without Russia. And in the minds of Putin, and I think a lot of people around him, we are in a zone in which Russia's very existence is at stake. So I would tread very carefully.
Karaganov and Trenin risk diluting the taboo of nuclear war. Second, the pernicious thing here is that no single person in Putin's inner circle needs to be convinced of a preemptive nuclear strike for talk about it to be normalized and to shift from being 10 to being 20% of the economy of discourse in Putin's circle. I want to come in here in my capacity as a moral philosopher and make 3 eviscerating points about Karaganov and co. 1. This is a rare case where words might be worse than sticks and stones. Nuclear threats don't kill anybody, the way bombing civilians in Ukraine does. But bombing civilians does not endanger the survival of human civilization. But nuclear war does. 2. It's already a moral crime to even raise the possibility of starting a nuclear war. And here Mr. Trenin, despite his softer tone, definitively ends up in the moral dock. What's despicable isn't just the way they answer the question, but it's that they raise it at all. This is what the moral philosopher Bernard Williams called one thought too many. If you say, I wonder if it's okay to start a nuclear war, and decide that on balance it isn't, that is already a moral problem, the fact that you have raised the question. 3. I've foregrounded Karaganov out of a number of analysts, public officials, propagandists, because his contribution is thoughtful and it uses intellectual manipulation to disguise the moral crime of starting a war as a quest for peace. It's the thoughtfulness of amoral intelligence, a casuistry that uses rational argument to obscure a ghastly proposal in the name of a regime that has nothing to offer the world. And even worse, Mr. Karaganov and Mr. Trenin, I speculate, surely half know that the Putin project is empty, but they're hoping it lasts long enough for them never to be held accountable for their words. As political theorist John Donne has said of the Putin regime, elevating nuclear risk makes you an enemy of the human race as a whole. All these folks are enemies of the human race, even if they've never killed a fly and couch their arguments in appeals for peace. We should not forget their words, and we should not move on one day when the war is over. How have these people managed to turn reality on its head so preposterously? To understand a bit more about the magical and mystical thinking in Putin's regime, watch this video about Putin's obsession with his hero, Tsar Alexander III.